You're walking down the aisle in your dream wedding dress, about to marry the love of your life, and you witness a shocking thing. But here's the thing that'll make your blood run cold. Your three bridesmaids, they're not shocked, they're not confused. They're looking at the floor with guilt written all over their faces because they all knew. Every single one of them knew your groom had a secret, and they decided you didn't deserve to know. What happened next didn't just destroy a wedding. It shattered the very foundation of trust between four best friends forever. Now, before I tell you how Clara discovered the most devastating betrayal of her life, let me warn you, this story has multiple twists that'll make you question everything you think you know about loyalty, friendship, and the lies people tell themselves when they think they're protecting someone they love. Because what Clara did 3 days after her wedding was ruined, even her ex-bridesmaids never saw it coming. And what she uncovered about Julian's past, it was so much worse than anyone imagined. But let's start from the very beginning. To understand how devastating this betrayal really was, you need to know about the bond these four women shared. Clara, Stella, Lily, and Maya weren't just college friends who stayed in touch. They were trauma-bonded sisters who'd pulled each other through the darkest moments of their lives. They'd met during their sophomore year at Portland State University, thrown together as roommates in a cramped off-campus apartment. Claire was there on a partial scholarship, working 2 jobs to pay for school, after her father had walked out on the family when she was 16. She'd learned early that the people you trust most are often the ones who hurt you deepest, a lesson that made what happened at her wedding even more devastating. Stella came from an American family where she was the first to go to college. The pressure to succeed was crushing, and she'd developed anxiety so severe that she'd have panic attacks in the middle of lectures. Clara was the one who'd sit with her in bathroom stalls, helping her breathe through the worst moments. Lily had grown up in a household where emotional expression was discouraged. Her parents, both successful doctors, had raised her to believe that feelings were weakness. When she'd had a complete breakdown during finals week junior year, sobbing uncontrollably in the library, it was Clara who had found her and helped her realize she needed therapy. Maya had been the strong one, the one who seemed to have it all together. But during their senior year, she'd confided in Clara about her mother's alcoholism and how she'd essentially been raising her 2 younger brothers since she was 12. Clara had been the one to help Maya apply for jobs that would let her send money home while still building her own career. These weren't casual friendships. These were women who'd seen each other at their absolute lowest and had chosen to love and support each other anyway. They made a pact during graduation. No matter what happens, we tell each other the truth. Always. Even when it hurts. That pact made what happened at the wedding so much more than just a betrayal. It was a complete destruction of their shared history. When Clara met Julian Torres at a tech conference in downtown Portland, she was 26 and had just gotten out of a relationship that had left her questioning her judgment about men. Her ex Marcus had been charming and attentive at first, but had gradually become controlling and manipulative. The breakup had been messy, with Marcus telling her that she was too needy and would never find anyone who could put up with her emotional baggage. Julian seemed like the complete opposite. He was 30, established in his career as a software engineer, and had a maturity that Marcus had lacked. More importantly, he seemed genuinely interested in Clara's thoughts and feelings. He'd ask about her day and actually listen to the answers. He'd remember small details about her life and bring them up in conversation days later. "I've never felt so seen by someone," Clara told Stella after their 3rd date. "He looks at me like I'm the most interesting person in the world." What Clara didn't know was that Julian had perfected this technique through years of practice. He'd learned how to make women feel special, how to identify what they needed emotionally, and how to provide just enough of it to keep them hooked. It wasn't conscious manipulation. Julian genuinely believed he was being a good boyfriend. But his pattern of becoming whoever his partner needed him to be had been developing for years. The relationship moved fast. Julian was always the one pushing for the next step. moving in together after 6 months, talking about marriage after a year, proposing after 18 months. Clara, who had been cautious about commitment since her father's abandonment, found herself swept up in Julian's certainty about their future. He makes me feel so secure, like I never have to worry about him leaving or changing his mind about us, she told her bridesmaids during one of their monthly dinners. Stella, who had always been the most perceptive of the group, had noticed something off about Julian. He was almost too perfect, too agreeable. When the four women would hang out together, Julian would adapt his personality to match whoever he was talking to. With Stella, he'd discuss social justice issues. With Lily, he'd be gentle and nurturing. With Maya, he'd be practical and goal-oriented.
Don't you think it's weird how he's like a different person with each of us? Stella had asked Lily and Maya privately about a year into Clara's relationship. Maybe he's just socially aware, Maya had replied. Some people are good at reading rooms. Or maybe he's just genuinely interested in all of us, Lily had added. Clara's happy. That's what matters. Stella had let it go, but she'd filed away her concerns. She'd grown up in a household where her father was charming to everyone outside the family, but showed his true colors at home. She recognized the signs of someone who was performing rather than being authentic. But every time she thought about bringing up her concerns with Clara, she'd see how happy her friend was. Clara was glowing in a way Stella had never seen before. She was confident, excited about the future, and more trusting than she'd been since her father's abandonment. How could Stella risk destroying that with what might just be her own paranoia? Julian's proposal was everything Clara had dreamed of and more. He'd taken her back to the beach where they'd had their first official date, had a photographer hiding in the dunes to capture the moment, and had arranged for her favorite flowers to be waiting in the car afterward. I knew the moment I met you that I wanted to spend the rest of my life with you, he'd said down on one knee in the sand. You've made me a better man, Clara. You've made me want to be the person you see when you look at me. Clara had sobbed so hard she could barely get the word yes out. But even in that moment of pure joy, there was something that nagged at her. Julian had said she made him want to be the person she saw when she looked at him. Not that he was that person, but that he wanted to be. The engagement period was a whirlwind. Julian was enthusiastic about every aspect of wedding planning, except for one thing. He was oddly resistant to combining their friend groups. He'd always have an excuse for why he couldn't make it to events where Clara's friends would be meeting his. My friends are kind of boring, he'd say. They're all tech bros who just want to talk about work. I'd rather focus on your friends. They're so much more interesting. Clara had found this charming at first. Julian was choosing her world over his own, right? But as the months went on, she realized she knew almost nothing about Julian's life before her. He'd mentioned an ex-girlfriend or two in passing, but never with any detail. He'd talked about his job, but she'd never met any of his coworkers. He'd mentioned his family, but always seemed to have reasons why it wasn't a good time for her to meet them. Don't you think it's weird that I've never met any of Julian's friends? Clara had asked her bridesmaids during a dress shopping trip. Maybe he's just private, Maya had suggested. Some people keep their worlds separate. Or maybe his friends really are boring, Lily had added with a laugh. You know how tech guys can be. Stella had stayed quiet, but her unease was growing. She'd tried to do some casual social media stalking of Julian, but his profiles were surprisingly sparse. No tagged photos with friends, no comments from family members, no history beyond the last 2 years. When she'd mentioned this to Lily and Maya, they'd brushed off her concerns. Not everyone lives their life on social media, Maya had said. Maybe that's actually a good thing. You're being paranoid, Lily had added. Claire's happy. Julian treats her well. That's what matters. But Stella's concerns proved to be more valid than anyone could have imagined. The weekend at Stella's family cabin was supposed to be a celebration. The wedding was 3 weeks away, all the major planning was done, and the 4 women wanted quality time together before Clara's life changed forever. They'd arrived Friday evening and spent the night drinking wine and reminiscing about college. Saturday morning, they'd planned to go hiking, but Lily had forgotten her phone charger and her phone was dead. Julian had been at the cabin the weekend before, helping Stella's father with some repairs, and had left his old phone behind. Just use Julian's phone for music, Stella had suggested. He said the password is Clara's birthday. That detail should have been sweet, but when Lily typed in the numbers, she got an error message. She tried a few variations, the year Clara was born, the date they met, the date they got engaged. Nothing worked. Maybe it's not Clara's birthday, Maya had suggested. Try some other dates. Lily had started typing random combinations, and when she typed in what turned out to be Evelyn's birthday, the phone unlocked.
Weird, Lily had muttered. I wonder what this date is. That's when Stella had taken the phone to look for the music app and had stumbled across the photos. The first photo she saw was Julian and Evelyn at what looked like a birthday party. Evelyn was wearing a princess dress, and Julian was helping her blow out candles on a cake. The date stamp showed it was from just 2 months ago. Oh my God, Stella had whispered. What? Lily had rushed over, followed by Maya. The three women had scrolled through dozens of photos spanning several years. Julian pushing Evelyn on a swing, Julian reading her a bedtime story, Julian and Evelyn with a woman who was clearly her mother, a woman they'd never heard of. But it was the video that made everything clear. A video of Evelyn, taken just a few weeks earlier, running toward the camera yelling, "Daddy, Daddy," while Julian laughed and swept her up in his arms. How old do you think she is? Lily had asked, her voice shaking. 4 or 5, Maya had replied, which means Julian was with her mother while he was with Clara, at least at the beginning. The timeline was devastating. Based on the photos, Julian had been in Evelyn's life consistently for years. This wasn't some distant child from a past relationship that he'd recently reconnected with. This was an active, ongoing relationship that he'd been hiding from Clara for their entire relationship. Stella had called Julian immediately, her hand shaking as she dialed. Stella? Is everything okay? Is Clara? Julian, I need you to explain to me why I'm looking at photos of you with a little girl who's obviously your daughter, and why Clara has never mentioned having a stepdaughter. The silence that followed lasted so long that Stella had thought the call had dropped. Julian? I can explain, he'd said finally, his voice shaking. Please, Stella, let me explain. What Julian told Stella over the phone was a carefully crafted story designed to manipulate her into keeping his secret. He'd had years to perfect this narrative, to practice how he'd explain himself if he ever got caught. Evelyn's mother is Rachel. We were together for about a year, and when she got pregnant, I panicked. I was 25, I was barely making enough money to support myself, and I wasn't ready to be a father. I made the worst decision of my life. I walked away. He paused, letting that sink in. I've regretted it every day since. When I met Clara, I knew I wanted to be a better man. I wanted to be the kind of man who could be a good husband and father. So I started trying to reconnect with Rachel and Evelyn about 6 months ago. 6 months ago, Stella had interrupted. Julian, you proposed to Clara 8 months ago. I know how it sounds, Julian had said quickly, but I was planning to tell Clara. I needed to figure out what my relationship with Evelyn was going to look like first. I didn't want to dump all of this uncertainty on Clara when I didn't even know if Rachel would let me be part of Evelyn's life. It was a lie, but it was a sophisticated one. Julian had actually been in Evelyn's life consistently since she was born. He'd been dating Rachel when he met Clara and had been living a double life for the entire duration of his relationship with Clara. But he knew that admitting to that level of deception would make it impossible for anyone to justify keeping his secret. I love Clara more than anything in this world, Julian had continued, and I know she'll love Evelyn too. But you know how Clara is. She's been through so much with her father leaving. If I tell her about Evelyn now, 3 weeks before our wedding, she might think I'm going to abandon her the way her father did. She might not be able to handle it. This was Julian's most manipulative move, using Clara's trauma against her. He knew that Stella, Lily, and Maya all knew about Clara's abandonment issues. He knew they'd be terrified of doing anything that might trigger those feelings. The wedding is in 3 weeks,
Julian had pressed. Everything is planned. Everyone is coming. If I tell Clara now, it might destroy everything we've built together. But if I wait until after the wedding, until we're married and secure, then I can introduce Evelyn into our lives gradually. Clara will see that I'm not going anywhere, that I'm committed to our family. Julian, this is insane, Stella had said. You can't start a marriage with a lie this big. It's not a lie, Julian had insisted. It's just timing. I'm not hiding Evelyn forever. I'm just waiting for the right moment to tell Clara about her. You know Clara better than anyone. You know how she gets when she's overwhelmed. She's been planning this wedding for months, dealing with her mother's opinions, stressing about everything being perfect. If I add this to her plate right now, it might be too much. Then Julian had played his ace card. And think about Evelyn. She's just a little girl who wants her daddy to be happy. She's been asking me about Clara, about when she'll get to meet her new stepmom. If Clara calls off the wedding because of this, Evelyn will blame herself. She'll think she ruined her daddy's chance at happiness. Julian had ended the call by begging Stella to keep the secret for just 3 more weeks. I'm going to tell Clara everything right after the honeymoon. I promise. I just need you to trust me on this. When Stella had hung up, she'd felt sick. She'd told Lily and Maya everything Julian had said, and they'd spent the rest of the weekend agonizing over what to do. The conversation that followed was the most difficult the 3 women had ever had. They'd spent Saturday night at the cabin, barely sleeping, going over and over the situation. "We have to tell her," Lily had said, pacing around the small living room. "We have to tell Clara right now." But what if Julian's right, Maya had asked. What if telling her now really does destroy everything? "Then maybe it should be destroyed," Lily had shot back. "Maya, he has a secret daughter. This isn't some small thing he forgot to mention. This is a child." Stella had been quiet for most of the discussion, but finally she'd spoken up. "What if we're making this worse by telling her now?" It was the beginning of the most toxic rationalization any of them had ever engaged in. Over the next few hours, they'd convinced themselves that they were protecting Clara by keeping Julian's secret. "She's been so happy, happier than I've ever seen her. What if we destroy that for nothing?" "And the wedding is in 3 weeks," Lily had added, already starting to waver. "All the plans, all the money, her parents have been saving for this for years." "Julian says he's going to tell her after the honeymoon. Maybe we should trust him to handle this." But even as they talked themselves into keeping the secret, they'd all known deep down that they were making a terrible mistake. They'd just been too scared to face the consequences of telling the truth. Julian had called each of them separately over the next few days, carefully tailoring his manipulation to each woman's personality and fears. To Stella, he'd appealed to her role as the group's protector. "You've always been the one who looks out for everyone. You know Clara better than anyone. You know this would destroy her right now, when she's already so vulnerable. Help me protect her until I can tell her the right way." To Lily, he'd played on her empathy and fear of conflict. "I know you're worried about Clara, and I love that about you. But think about how much pain we could cause by dropping this bomb right now. Think about Clara's parents who've been looking forward to this day for years. Think about all the guests who are traveling to be there. And think about Evelyn. She's just a little girl who doesn't understand adult complications." To Maya, he appealed to her practical nature. "I know you're the logical one in the group, Maya. Look at this logically. The wedding is in 3 weeks. The venue is booked. The caterers are hired. The flowers are ordered. Clara's dress is altered and ready. Her family has spent thousands of dollars on this. If we blow everything up now, it's not just Clara who gets hurt. It's everyone who loves her." Each woman had found herself agreeing to keep the secret, but for different reasons. Stella had convinced herself she was protecting Clara from emotional trauma. Lily had convinced herself she was preventing unnecessary pain for everyone involved. Maya had convinced herself she was being practical and logical.
What none of them had realized was that Julian was a master manipulator who'd been using these same techniques for years. He'd learned how to identify what people needed to hear and how to present himself as the solution to their problems. The 3 weeks leading up to the wedding were torture for all three bridesmaids. They'd committed to keeping Julian's secret, but the weight of it was crushing them in different ways. Lily was the worst at hiding her guilt. She'd always been the most emotionally transparent of the group, and keeping this secret from Clara was killing her. She'd started having panic attacks again for the first time in years. She'd wake up in the middle of the night, her heart racing, thinking about the moment Clara would find out they'd all betrayed her. During wedding planning sessions, Lily would find herself staring at Clara, memorizing her face, knowing that their friendship might be over soon. She'd start crying randomly, claiming she was just emotional about Clara getting married, but really grieving the loss of their friendship that she was sure was coming.
"I can't do this," Lily had texted Stella and Maya after a particularly difficult bridal shower. "I can't keep lying to her face. She keeps thanking us for being such good friends, and I want to die." Maya had thrown herself into wedding logistics as a way to cope with her guilt. She had become obsessed with every detail, micromanaging vendors and double-checking every arrangement. She'd convinced herself that if she could make the wedding perfect, somehow that would make up for what they were doing to Clara. But the stress was eating away at her. She had started snapping at everyone, vendors, family members, even Clara. She had lost 10 pounds in 3 weeks because she was too anxious to eat. Her mother had called her, worried about how thin she looked in photos. "I feel like I'm losing my mind," Maya had confided to Stella. "I keep thinking about what Clara's going to say when she finds out. She's going to look at us and realize we chose Julian over her. She's going to know we're not the friends she thought we were." Stella was the best at maintaining the facade, but it was destroying her from the inside. She'd always been the leader of the group, the one the others looked to for guidance. She'd prided herself on being strong and making good decisions. But she knew that this time she'd made the wrong choice, and she was dragging her friends down with her. She'd lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, running through different scenarios. What if they told Clara now? What if they waited until after the wedding? What if Julian never told her? What if Clara found out on her own and discovered they'd known all along? Every scenario ended with their friendship being destroyed. But Stella had convinced herself that, at least this way, Clara would have her perfect wedding day first. The guilt was manifesting in physical symptoms for all three women. Lily was having headaches and insomnia. Maya was losing weight and having stomach problems. Stella was grinding her teeth so badly at night that she'd cracked a molar. And Clara noticed everything. "You guys are scaring me," she'd said during the final dress fitting, looking at her three friends in the mirror. "You all look like you haven't slept in weeks. Are you okay?" "Wedding stress," Stella had said, but her voice sounded hollow. "It's a lot to coordinate," Maya had added, but she couldn't meet Clara's eyes. "I'm just emotional," Lily had whispered, and it was the most honest thing any of them had said in weeks. Clara had studied their faces in the mirror, and for a moment, Stella thought she was going to push harder, demand to know what was really going on. But then Clara had smiled and said, "You guys are the best friends anyone could ask for. I'm so lucky to have you in my life." The words had hit all three women like physical blows. They'd each had to excuse themselves from the fitting room at different points to cry in private. Clara wasn't naive. She'd known something was wrong with her friends for weeks, but she'd been trying to give them the benefit of the doubt. Wedding planning was stressful, and she'd assumed they were just feeling the pressure of wanting everything to be perfect for her. But as the wedding approached, their behavior became impossible to ignore. There were the conversations that stopped when she entered a room, the guilty looks they exchanged when they thought she wasn't watching, the way they'd all suddenly become obsessed with their phones, constantly checking messages with expressions of anxiety. And then there was the way they'd started treating her, with a kind of desperate affection that felt like they were trying to make up for something. Stella had bought her an expensive piece of jewelry just because. Maya had surprised her with a weekend spa day 2 weeks before the wedding. Lily had been bringing her homemade treats almost daily. "It's like they think I'm dying," Clara had joked to Julian. "They're being so nice to me, it's almost creepy." Julian's reaction had been telling. He'd gotten that same look on his face just for a split second that she'd noticed whenever her friends came up in conversation lately. A look of guilt mixed with panic. "They'd just love you," he'd said. "They want your wedding to be perfect." But Clara had started paying closer attention to Julian's behavior too. He'd been more attentive than usual, more affectionate, more eager to please. He'd been bringing her flowers for no reason, surprising her with her favorite dinner, constantly telling her how much he loved her. It was the kind of behavior that might have seemed romantic to an outside observer, but Clara knew Julian well enough to recognize it as overcompensation. He was acting like someone who was trying to make up for something. The breaking point had come a week before the wedding. Clara had been at Julian's apartment and his phone had been buzzing with notifications. When she'd glanced at it, she'd seen several messages from someone named R with heart emojis. "Who's R?" she'd asked casually. Julian had grabbed his phone quickly, almost frantically. "Oh, it's Robert from work. He uses weird emojis for everything." But Clara had seen enough of the messages to know they weren't from a coworker named Robert. They were personal, intimate messages from someone who clearly had a close relationship with Julian. "Can I see?" she'd asked, holding out her hand for his phone. "It's just boring work stuff," Julian had said, but he'd held the phone protectively against his chest. "Then it won't be a problem for me to look," Clara had replied, her voice getting harder. Julian had stared at her for a long moment, and she'd seen genuine fear in his eyes. "Clara, you don't trust me." It was a deflection, and they both knew it, but Clara had let it go, not wanting to fight a week before their wedding. She'd filed it away with all the other red flags she'd been collecting. That night, she'd called her older sister Emma, who lived in Seattle. "I think something's wrong," Clara had said without preamble. "I think Julian's hiding something from me, and I think my friends know what it is." Emma listened while Clara laid out all her concerns. The secretive behavior, the overcompensation, the way everyone seemed to be walking on eggshells around her. "What does your gut tell you?" Emma had asked finally. "My gut tells me that everyone I love is lying to me, and hearing the words out loud had made me realize how true they were." "Then you need to find out what they're lying about before you marry him." The morning of the wedding, Clara had woken up with a sense of dread so profound that she had actually considered calling the whole thing off. She'd sat on the edge of her bed, staring at her wedding dress hanging on the closet door, and had felt like she was about to make the biggest mistake of her life. But then she'd thought about all the people who were counting on her. Her parents who had spent their retirement savings on this wedding, Julian's family who'd flown in from across the country, all their friends who'd taken off work and bought plane tickets. She'd pushed the feeling down and gotten ready for what was supposed to be the happiest day of her life. The bridesmaids had arrived at 8 a.m. for hair and makeup, and Clara had immediately known something was very wrong. They'd all looked like they'd been crying, and none of them could meet her eyes. "Are you guys okay?" she'd asked, studying their faces in the mirror. "We're fine," Stella had said, but her voice was shaking. "Just emotional," Maya had added, but she'd been staring at her phone with an expression of pure anxiety. Lily had excused herself to the bathroom 3 times in the first hour, and each time Clara had heard her crying. "Lily, what is wrong?" Clara had finally demanded, following her into the bathroom. I'm just so happy for you," Lily had sobbed. "You look so beautiful, and I'm just happy." But she looked anything but happy. She'd look like she was grieving. During the hair and makeup process, Clara had noticed that her friends kept checking their phones and exchanging worried glances. At one point, she'd caught them in a hushed conversation near the window. "I can't do this," she'd heard Lily whisper. "Too late now," Maya had replied. "She's going to hate us," Stella had added. Clara's heart started racing. "What are you guys talking about?" "Nothing," Stella had said quickly. "Just wedding stuff." But Clara had seen the guilt written all over their faces, and she'd known
they were lying. The photographer had arrived around 10 a.m., and Clara had tried to focus on the photos, on capturing memories of what was supposed to be the happiest day of her life. But every time she looked at her bridesmaids, she saw fear and guilt instead of joy. "Can we get some shots of just the bride?" the photographer had suggested, and Clara had been relieved to have a moment away from her friend's anxious energy. But when she'd looked at herself in the mirror, she'd barely recognized the woman staring back at her. She looked beautiful on the outside, but her eyes were filled with uncertainty and fear. "I can't do this," she'd whispered to herself. But then she thought about Julian, waiting for her at the altar, and she'd forced herself to continue with the charade. The ceremony itself had been a blur of forced smiles and racing heartbeats. Clara had walked down the aisle, trying to focus on Julian's face, trying to recapture the joy she'd felt when he'd proposed. But when she'd looked at him, she'd seen the same guilt and fear that she'd been seeing in her friends' faces. He'd looked like a man who was about to confess to a crime. During the vows, when Julian had promised to love, honor, and cherish her, and to be honest and faithful, Clara had felt her stomach drop. The words had sounded hollow, rehearsed, like he was reading from a script rather than speaking from his heart. She'd glanced at her bridesmaids and had seen Lily close her eyes and shake her head, almost imperceptibly. Maya had been staring at the ground, and Stella had been gripping her bouquet so tightly that her knuckles were white. "I do," Julian had said, but his voice had cracked on the words. "I do," Clara had replied, but the words felt like a lie. The reception had been even worse. Clara had felt like she was watching her own life from outside her body, going through the motions of celebrating while her world crumbled around her. She'd noticed that Julian kept checking his phone, looking increasingly agitated as the evening went on. At one point, she'd seen him step outside to take a call, and when he came back, he looked like he had seen a ghost. "Is everything okay?" she asked him. "Everything's perfect," but his eyes were darting around the room like he was looking for an escape route. Clara had been making her rounds, trying to enjoy her reception when she'd noticed a commotion near the entrance. People were staring and whispering, and Clara had turned to see what was happening. That's when she'd seen her. A woman in her mid-30s, clearly distressed, holding the hand of a little girl. The woman had been looking around frantically, and Clara had realized she was looking for someone. And then Clara had seen what she was looking for. The little girl had broken free from her mother's hand and had run straight toward the head table. Straight toward Julian. "Daddy!" she had called out, her voice carrying across the suddenly quiet reception hall. Time had seemed to slow down. Clara had watched in horror as this beautiful child with Julian's eyes had thrown herself into his arms. She'd watched Julian's face transform from panic to resignation to something that looked almost relief. But it was her bridesmaids' faces that confirmed her worst fears. They weren't shocked. They weren't confused. They were guilty. "You knew?" Clara had said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You knew. He had a daughter." Stella's face had crumpled. "Clara, we can explain. You all knew!" Clara had screamed, her voice echoing through the reception hall. The silence that had followed had been deafening. Every guest in the room had turned to stare at them. The little girl had started crying. The woman, who was clearly her mother, had looked like she wanted to disappear. "How long?" Clara had asked, her voice deadly quiet. "How long have you known?" 3 weeks, Lily had whispered, tears streaming down her face. 3 weeks, Clara had repeated, and she felt something break inside her chest. "You've known for 3 weeks that my husband has a secret daughter, and you said nothing? We were trying to protect you," Maya had said desperately.
Protect me? Claire's voice had been shaking with rage. You think this is protecting me? You think letting me marry someone who's been lying to me about having a child is protecting me? She turned to Julian, who was still holding his daughter, looking like he wanted to disappear. And you looked me up the eye 2 weeks ago and promised me there was nothing I should know. You lied to my face. Clara, please, Julian had begged. I love you. I was going to tell you. When? Clara had demanded. When were you going to tell me? After our honeymoon? After I got pregnant? After I spent years building a life with you based on a lie? The woman who was clearly Evelyn's mother had stepped forward, her face pale with embarrassment and fear. I'm so sorry, she'd said, her voice barely audible. I didn't know. Julian told me you knew about Evelyn. He said you were okay with me bringing her to meet you. I never would have come if I'd known. Clara had stared at this woman, Rachel, she'd realized, and had seen the truth in her eyes. Rachel hadn't known she was destroying a wedding. She thought she was bringing Julian's daughter to meet his new wife. You told her I knew? Claire had turned back to Julian, her voice incredulous. You told her I knew about Evelyn? Julian had looked like a cornered animal. I was going to tell you. I was going to introduce you after the wedding. I told Rachel it would be better to wait until after the ceremony, but she misunderstood and thought, you told another woman about your daughter, but not my wife? Claire's had been getting louder with each word. You've been planning my introduction to your child with her mother, but not with me? But the worst revelation was yet to come. As Rachel had stood there, looking mortified and confused, she'd said something that had made Clara's blood run cold. Julian, I don't understand. When you picked up Evelyn for her overnight visit last week, you said Clara was excited to meet her. You said you'd been talking about me joining you for family dinners. The reception hall had gone completely silent. Clara had felt like she'd been punched in the stomach. Overnight visit? She repeated. Last week? Julian had gone white. Rachel, don't... Last week, when you told me you were at a work conference in Seattle, you were with your daughter? Clara, I can explain. You've been having overnight visits with your daughter, and you told me you were at work events? Claire had felt her entire world tilting on its axis. How long? How long have you been lying to me about where you were? Rachel had looked between them, finally understanding the situation. Oh my God, she whispered. You really didn't know. Julian, what have you done? And then Rachel had said the words that destroyed everything. We've been co-parenting for 5 years. Julian has Evelyn every other weekend and one night during the week. He's been part of her life since she was born. The reception hall had erupted in shocked whispers. Clara had felt like she was drowning. 5 years? She said, her voice breaking. We've been together for 2 years. You've been lying to me for our entire relationship? Julian had finally put Evelyn down, and the little girl had run to her mother, scared by all the shouting. He'd looked at Claire with tears in his eyes. I wanted to tell you, he had said, but I was scared you'd leave me. I was scared you wouldn't understand. Understand what? Clara had screamed. That you're a father? That you have a daughter who depends on you? That you've been living a double life for our entire relationship? I was trying to protect everyone, Julian had said desperately. I was trying to figure out how to blend our lives together. By lying to me every single day? Claire had turned to look at her bridesmaids again. And you three, you helped him do it. You helped him lie to me. Stella had stepped forward, tears streaming down her face. Clara, we thought we were doing the right thing. You thought what? Clara had interrupted. You thought I was too weak to handle the truth? You thought I deserved to be lied to? You thought it was better for me to find out like this in front of everyone I love? We thought telling you would ruin your wedding, Maya had said, her voice barely audible. My wedding is ruined, Clara had screamed. It's ruined because my husband is a liar and my best friends are cowards. Clara had looked around the reception hall at all the faces staring at her, her parents, Julian's family, their friends, all watching her marriage implode in real time.
Her father-in-law had stepped forward, his face grave. "Julian, is this true? Do you have a daughter?" "Dad, I can explain." "Do you have a daughter?" the older man had repeated, his voice firm. "Yes," Julian had whispered. Clara's mother had gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Oh, honey," she had said, looking at Clara with such pain in her eyes. "Did any of you know?" Clara had asked, looking around at Julian's family. "Did any of you know he had a daughter?" The guilty looks on their faces had told her everything she needed to know. "You all knew," she had said, her voice hollow. "Everyone knew, except me." Julian's sister had stepped forward, looking ashamed. "Clara, we wanted to tell you. We thought Julian would tell you himself. We kept asking him when he was going to introduce you to Evelyn." "You've been asking him for 2 years when he was going to tell me about his daughter, and none of you thought to tell me yourselves?" Clara had felt like she was living in a nightmare. "We thought it was his place," Julian's mother had said quietly. "We thought he'd do the right thing." Clara had turned back to Julian, and the look on her face had been one of pure disgust. "The right thing? You think there was ever going to be a right way to tell me you'd been lying to me for our entire relationship?" "I was scared," Julian had said, and it was the first honest thing he had said all night. "Scared of what? Scared I'd leave you? Scared I wouldn't want to be with someone who had a child? Scared I'd find out you're not the man you pretended to be?" "All of it," Julian had whispered. "Well, congratulations," Clara had said, her voice ice cold. "You've made all of your fears come true." She'd reached up and pulled off her wedding ring, setting it on the head table with a decisive click. "I can't do this," she had said, her voice eerily calm. "I can't marry someone who lies to me, and I can't have friends who think it's okay to help him do it." "Clara, please," Julian had said, reaching for her. "Don't do this. We can work through this. We can figure it out." "Work through what?" Claire had asked. "Work through the fact that you've been lying to me every single day for 2 years? Work through the fact that you have a daughter you've been hiding from me? Work through the fact that you've been having a relationship with another woman, your daughter's mother, that I knew nothing about?" "Rachel and I aren't together," Julian had said desperately. "We're just co-parenting." "Co-parenting," Clara had repeated. "You've been co-parenting for 5 years and I didn't even know you were a parent?" She'd looked at Evelyn, who was clinging to her mother's hand, scared and confused by all the shouting. The little girl was beautiful, with Julian's dark eyes and a shy smile that broke Clara's heart. "She's beautiful," Clara had said softly, and for a moment her voice had been gentle. "She deserves a father who's proud of her, not one who hides her like a shameful secret." Then she looked at Rachel, who was still standing there looking mortified. "I'm sorry," Clara had said. "I'm sorry you and your daughter got caught up in this. You didn't deserve to be used as a weapon in whatever game Julian was playing." Rachel had nodded, tears in her eyes. "I'm sorry too. I had no idea. He told you you knew everything." "Of course he did," Clara had said bitterly. "He's very good at telling people what they want to hear." She turned to her bridesmaids one last time. "You thought you were protecting me. You destroyed me, all of you. You made me feel crazy for months, questioning my own instincts, wondering why I felt like everyone was lying to me. Well, congratulations. Everyone was lying to me." "Clara, please," Stella had begged. "Let us explain. Let us make this right." "There is no making this right," Clara had said. "You chose to lie to me. You chose to let me stand up here and make vows to someone who's been deceiving me for our entire relationship. You chose to let me humiliate myself in front of everyone I love." She looked at each of them in turn. "Stella, you were supposed to be my best friend, my sister. I trusted you more than anyone in the world. Lily, you were supposed to be the sweet one, the one who always told the truth. Maya, you are supposed to be the practical one, the one who would never let me make a mistake this big. And all of you betrayed me." "We thought we were doing the right thing," Maya had said, her voice breaking. "No," Clara had said firmly. "No, you thought you were doing the easy thing. You thought you were avoiding conflict. You thought you were protecting yourselves from having to deal with the fallout of telling me the truth." What happened next surprised everyone, including Clara herself. Instead of breaking down, instead of collapsing under the weight of the betrayal, she found a strength She didn't know she had. "You know what?" she had said, her voice growing stronger. "Thank you." Everyone had stared at her in shock. "Thank you. Thank you for showing me who you really are. Thank you for showing me that Julian is a coward and a liar. Thank you for showing me that my best friends are people who will lie to my face to avoid an uncomfortable conversation." She'd looked directly at Julian. "And thank you for showing me this before I actually married you. Before I had children with you, before I wasted more years of my life on someone who doesn't respect me enough to tell me the truth." Julian had looked like he'd been slapped. "Clara, I do respect you. I love you." "You don't love me," Clara had said, her voice cutting through the silence. "You loved the idea of me. You loved the version of me that you created in your head, the version that would never ask hard questions, never demand honesty, never expect you to be a real partner." She'd turned to her bridesmaids. "And you three don't love me either. You love the idea of protecting me, but you don't actually respect me enough to trust me with the truth. You think I'm too weak, too fragile, too stupid to handle reality." "That's not true," Lily had sobbed. "It is true," Clara had said firmly, "because if you really believed I was strong enough to handle the truth, you would have told me. If you really believed I deserved better than a man who lies to me, you would have helped me see that. Instead, you helped him deceive me." She had looked around the reception hall one more time. "I'm sorry everyone's time and money was wasted on this. I'm sorry my parents spent their savings on a wedding that ended in a disaster. I'm sorry Julian's family traveled here to watch their son humiliate his bride. But I'm not sorry I found out the truth." She had started to walk towards the exit, then turned back. "Oh, and Julian? Your daughter is beautiful, and she deserves so much better than a father who's ashamed of her. I hope someday you figure out how to be the man she thinks you are." And then she'd walked out of her own wedding reception, her head held high, leaving behind a room full of stunned guests and 3 former best friends who were finally understanding the magnitude of what they'd done. What Clara didn't see as she walked out was the chaos that erupted in her wake. Rachel had immediately gathered up Evelyn and left, furious at Julian for putting her and her daughter in such a horrible situation. "Don't ever contact us again," she told him as she walked out. "Evelyn doesn't need a father who's ashamed of her." Julian's family had surrounded him, their faces a mixture of anger and disappointment. His father had shaken his head in disgust. "How could you do this to that girl? How could you lie to her for 2 years?" "I was trying to protect everyone," Julian had said, but his voice had sounded hollow, even to himself. "You were protecting yourself," his sister had snapped. "You were too much of a coward to tell the truth, so you made everyone else complicit in your lies." Clara's parents had been devastated. Her mother had collapsed into a chair, sobbing, while her father had stood there looking like he wanted to hit something. "That poor girl," Clara's mother had kept saying. "Our poor baby. How could this happen?" But it was the bridesmaids who had suffered the most in those immediate moments after Clara left. They'd stood there in their matching dresses, surrounded by the ruins of their friendship, finally understanding what they'd done. "We destroyed her," Lily had whispered, her voice barely audible. "We destroyed our best friend." "We thought we were helping," Maya had said, but she'd sounded like she was trying to convince herself more than anyone else. Stella had been quiet for a long moment. Then she had said the words that would haunt all 3 of them. "We chose wrong. When it mattered most, we chose wrong." The reception had ended in chaos. Guests had filtered out awkwardly, not knowing what to say or do. The vendors had packed up in silence. The beautiful cake had gone untouched. Julian had sat alone at the head table, still in his tuxedo, staring at Clara's wedding ring. His best man had tried to comfort him, but Julian had shaken his head. "I did this. I destroyed everything." In the weeks that followed the wedding disaster, everyone involved struggled to process what had happened. Clara had disappeared.
She'd gone to stay with her sister Emma in Seattle and had refused to take calls or respond to messages from anyone. Not Julian, not her parents, not her former bridesmaids. I need time, she told Emma. I need to figure out who I am when I'm not being lied to by everyone I love. Emma had been furious on her sister's behalf. I never liked Julian, she had said. There was always something off about him. Too charming, too accommodating. Real people have edges. You should have said something, Clara had said. Would you have listened? Emma had asked gently. Clara had thought about it. Probably not. I was so desperate to believe in him, to believe I had found my happily ever after. And your friends? The bridesmaids? They're not my friends, Clara had said firmly. Friends don't lie to you. Friends don't help other people lie to you. Friends don't decide they know what's best for you better than you do. Meanwhile, Julian had been spiraling. He'd moved out of the apartment he'd shared with Clara and was staying with his brother, drinking too much and calling in sick to work more days than not. I lost everything, he'd kept saying. I lost Clara. I lost Evelyn. I lost my family's respect. I lost everything. You didn't lose everything. You threw it away. There's a difference. Julian had tried to contact Rachel, to explain, to apologize, but she'd blocked his number. Through mutual friends, he'd learned that she was considering moving to another city with Evelyn to get away from the mess he had created. She doesn't want Evelyn to have any connection to what happened, the mutual friend had told him. She thinks it's too traumatic for a 5-year-old to understand. Julian had realized that his lies hadn't just cost him Clara. They'd cost him his daughter, too. The 3 bridesmaids had been devastated. They'd tried to stay in touch with each other, but their friendship had been poisoned by what they'd done. Every time they were together, they were reminded of their betrayal.
Lily had been the worst affected. She'd always been the most sensitive of the group, and the guilt was eating her alive. She'd started seeing a therapist, trying to understand how she'd let herself become complicit in such a devastating lie. I keep thinking about her face, she told the therapist. The moment she realized we all knew, the way she looked at us, like we were strangers. Maya had thrown herself into work, trying to distract herself from the guilt, but she'd find herself crying at random moments, remembering Clara's words, "You chose him over me." Stella had been the most pragmatic about what they'd done, but that didn't make the guilt any easier to bear. She'd been the leader of the group, the one the others had looked to for guidance. She'd led them all into the worst decision of their lives. We need to accept that we might never get her back, she'd told Lily and Maya during one of their increasingly rare meetings. We need to accept that we destroyed something that can't be fixed. While everyone else was drowning in guilt and regret, Clara was doing something that surprised everyone who knew her. She was investigating. She'd always been trusting, always willing to take people at face value. But the wedding disaster had awakened something in her, a need to understand the full scope of what had been done to her. She'd started by hiring a private investigator to look into Julian's background. What she had found had been worse than she had imagined. Julian hadn't just hidden Evelyn from her, he'd hidden an entire previous life. The private investigator had discovered that Julian had been engaged to Rachel, Evelyn's mother, and had left her when she was 7 months pregnant. He'd disappeared for 2 years. Then he came back demanding to be part of Evelyn's life. He has a pattern, the investigator had told Clara. He creates these intense relationships, makes himself indispensable, then when things get complicated, he disappears. He came back to Rachel because he was lonely and she represented something familiar. Clara had learned that Julian had been living a double life for their entire relationship. He'd been with Evelyn every other weekend, just as Rachel had said. He'd been involved in school events, parent-teacher conferences, birthday parties. Oh, while telling Clara he was at work events or with male friends. He's constructed an entire alternate identity. He's very good at compartmentalizing his life. Most people who live double lives eventually slip up, but Julian had it down to a science. Clara had also discovered that Julian had been in therapy for years, trying to understand his own behavior. According to the investigator, Julian had been diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder, but had hidden this from everyone in his life. He knows exactly what he's doing, the investigator had explained. He's not a victim of his own emotions. He's a calculated manipulator who's very good at making people feel sorry for him. But the most devastating discovery had been about her bridesmaids. Clara had found out that Julian had been planning to tell them about Evelyn for months. He'd been carefully selecting the timing, waiting for a moment when he could manipulate them into keeping his secret. He studied them, the investigator had told Clara. He figured out exactly what to say to each of them to get them to do what he wanted. He's very good at reading people and exploiting their weaknesses. Clara had realized that her friends hadn't just stumbled into keeping Julian's secret, they'd been deliberately manipulated by someone who was skilled at psychological manipulation. But that didn't excuse what they'd done. It explained it, but it didn't excuse it. 3 months after the wedding disaster, Clara had finally felt ready to confront her former friends. She'd arranged to meet them at a neutral location, a coffee shop in downtown Portland where they'd spent countless hours during their college years. She'd arrived first and had watched them walk in together. All three of them looking nervous and hopeful. They'd aged years in the 3 months since the wedding. Lily looked like she'd lost weight and wasn't sleeping. Maya looked harder, more guarded. Stella looked tired in a way that went beyond physical exhaustion. "Clara," Stella had said, her voice breaking, "thank you for agreeing to see us. I'm not here to reconcile. I'm here to understand." The three women had sat down across from her, and Clara had felt like she was looking at strangers. These weren't the women she'd loved like sisters. These were people who had betrayed her in the worst possible way.
I hired a private investigator, Clara had said without preamble. I know everything now. I know about Julian's pattern of behavior. I know about his diagnosis. I know that he manipulated you into keeping his secret. The three women had exchanged glances, not sure what to say. I know that he studied each of you and figured out exactly what to say to get you to do what he wanted, Clara had continued. I know that he appealed to Stella's protective instincts, to Lily's fear of conflict, and to Maya's practical nature. Clara, Lily had started. I'm not done, Clara had interrupted. I also know that, despite being manipulated, you still had a choice. You still could have chosen to tell me the truth. You still could have chosen to put our friendship above your own comfort. The silence that had followed had been deafening. I want to understand, Clara had said finally. I want to understand how three women who claimed to love me could look me in the eye for 3 weeks and lie to me. I want to understand how you could watch me plan my wedding, try on my dress, talk about my future, all while knowing that future was built on a lie. Stella had been the first to speak. We convinced ourselves we were protecting you, she had said quietly. We convinced ourselves that telling you would hurt you more than not telling you. But that wasn't your decision to make, Clara had said. That was my decision. My life, my choice, my right to know the truth. We know that now, Maya had said, tears streaming down her face. We knew it then, too, deep down. We just didn't want to face it. Why? Clara had asked. Why didn't you want to face it? Because we were scared, Lily had whispered. We were scared of being the ones to hurt you. We were scared of being the ones to destroy your happiness. So you let Julian do it instead. You let him destroy my happiness in the worst possible way. We thought he would tell you, Stella had said. We thought he would tell you after the wedding, and then everything would be okay. Did you really believe that? Claire had asked. Did you really think that someone who could lie to me for 2 years would suddenly become honest after our wedding? The three women had sat in silence, unable to answer. I think you knew, Claire had said finally. I think you knew that Julian was never going to tell me the truth. I think you knew that I was going to find out eventually, and you decided that wasn't your problem. That's not true, Maya had said desperately. We cared about you. We loved you. No, Clara had said firmly. You loved the idea of me. You loved the version of me that didn't ask hard questions, didn't demand honesty, didn't expect you to be real friends. She looked at each of them in turn. Real friends tell each other the truth, even when it's hard. Real friends don't decide they know what's best for you better than you do. Real friends don't help other people lie to you. We're sorry, Lily had sobbed. We're so sorry, Clara. We made the worst mistake of our lives. Yes, you did. And I'm sorry too. I'm sorry that our friendship meant so little to you, that you were willing to throw it away to avoid an uncomfortable conversation. She'd stood up to leave, but then she'd turned back to face them one more time. I want you to understand something, she'd said. What you did to me wasn't just about keeping Julian's secret. You made me feel crazy. For months, I knew something was wrong, but I couldn't figure out what it was. I questioned my own instincts, my own judgment, my own sanity. The three women had looked stricken. I started thinking maybe I was paranoid. Maybe I was imagining things. I started doubting myself in ways that went far beyond just our friendship. You made me question everything I thought I knew about myself. We never meant to do that, Stella had said. But you did do it, Clara had replied. Intent doesn't matter. Impact matters. And the impact of what you did was that you made me doubt my own reality. She paused, gathering her thoughts. I also want you to understand that what you did to me affected more than just me. You helped Julian continue to lie to his daughter. You helped him continue to deceive Rachel. You helped him continue to live a double life that was hurting multiple people. We didn't think about that, Maya had admitted.
No, you didn't, Clara had said. You only thought about yourselves. You only thought about avoiding the discomfort of telling me the truth. Clara had looked at them for a long moment, these three women who had been her closest friends for years. I forgive you, she'd said finally. The three women had looked up at her with hope in their eyes. But I don't trust you, Clara had continued, and I don't want you in my life. The hope had died in their eyes. Forgiveness is about letting go of anger, Clara had explained. It's about not carrying around the poison of what you did to me. But trust is about believing that someone won't hurt you again. And I don't believe that. We's learned from this, Stella had said desperately. We would never do anything like this again. Maybe you wouldn't, Clara had said. But I can't take that risk. I can't have people in my life who think they know what's best for me better than I do. I can't have people in my life who will lie to me to avoid conflict. She'd picked up her purse and had headed for the door. Clara, wait, Lily had called out. Please, can't we try to rebuild this? Can't we earn your trust back? Clara had turned back one more time. Some things can't be rebuilt. Some betrayals are too big to overcome. This is one of them. So that's it, Maya had asked. Years of friendship just gone? You're the ones who made that choice, Clara had said. 3 months ago when you decided to lie to me. I'm just living with the consequences of your decision. And then she'd walked out of the coffee shop, leaving her 3 former best friends to face the reality of what they'd lost. A year after the wedding disaster, Clara had built a completely new life for herself. She'd moved to Seattle to be closer to her sister Emma, had started a new job at a design firm, and had begun the slow process of learning to trust people again. She'd been in therapy for months, working through the trauma of being betrayed by the people she'd loved most. She'd learned about manipulation, about red flags, about the importance of trusting her instincts. I'm not the same person I was a year ago, she told her therapist. I'm stronger, but I'm also more cautious. I don't know if that's good or bad. It's realistic, the therapist had said. You've learned that people aren't always who they seem to be. That's a hard lesson, but it's an important one. Clara had started dating again, but very slowly and carefully, she'd met someone, a kind, honest man named David, who had been upfront about his own past, including his divorce and his struggles with depression. He wasn't perfect, but he was real. I like that he's not trying to be the perfect boyfriend, Clara had told Emma. He's just trying to be himself. That's what you deserve, Emma had said. Someone who's authentic, even when it's not pretty. Clara had heard through mutual friends that Julian had moved to another city,
that he was in intensive therapy, and that he'd lost contact with his daughter entirely. Rachel had moved to Portland's suburbs and had started dating someone who knew about Evelyn from the beginning and loved them both. "I'm glad," Clara had said when she'd heard the news. "That little girl deserves a father figure who's proud of her." As for the three former bridesmaids, they'd all been affected differently by the aftermath of their betrayal. Lily had suffered the most. She'd had a complete breakdown 6 months after the wedding, had been hospitalized for depression, and had taken a leave of absence from her job. She'd been in intensive therapy ever since, trying to understand how she had let herself become complicit in such a devastating lie. "I lost myself," she'd told her therapist. "I became someone I didn't recognize, someone who'd lie to her best friend to avoid conflict."
Maya had become harder, more cynical. She'd thrown herself into her career and had achieved significant professional success, but her personal relationships had suffered. She'd pushed away other friends, afraid of getting too close to anyone. "I don't trust myself to be a good friend," she'd admitted to Stella during one of their increasingly rare conversations. "If I could betray Clara, I could betray anyone." Stella had been the most resilient, but she'd also been the most changed. She'd quit her job and had started working for a nonprofit organization that helped victims of domestic abuse. She'd dedicated herself to helping people who had been betrayed by those they trusted most. "I can't undo what I did to Clara," she'd told her supervisor, "but I can try to help other people who've been hurt by people they loved." The three women had tried to maintain their friendship after Clara left, but it had never been the same. They were constantly reminded of what they'd done, what they'd lost, what they'd chosen. "We're like war veterans," Maya had said during one of their last meetings. "We went through something traumatic together, but that doesn't mean we have to keep reliving it." They'd eventually drifted apart, each of them trying to build new lives and new identities that weren't defined by their betrayal of their best friend. On the one-year anniversary of what would have been her wedding day, Clara had taken a walk on the beach where Julian had proposed to her. She'd expected to feel sad, but instead she had felt something she hadn't expected: gratitude. "I'm grateful it happened. I'm grateful I found out who Julian really was before I married him. I'm grateful I found out who my friends really were before I wasted more years on them." She thought about the woman she'd been a year ago. Trusting, naive, desperate to believe in a fairy tale ending. That woman was gone, and Clara missed her sometimes, but she didn't want to be her again. "I'm stronger now," she'd said to herself, watching the waves crash against the shore. "I'm smarter, I'm more careful, but I'm also more authentic." She learned the most important lesson of all. Sometimes the people who claim to love you the most are the ones who will hurt you the deepest. And sometimes the greatest act of self-love is walking away from people who think they know what's best for you better than you do. The wedding may have been ruined, but Clara's life was just beginning.